How many times have you seen it happen? A big organizational change gets announced, lots of energy, lots of buzz,
Hmm.
and then a few months later, it's just gone, like it never happened.
Yeah, it's a really common frustration, isn't it?
Totally. So it makes you wonder, why do some changes actually stick, become the new normal, while others just, well, fizzle out?
That's the million-dollar question, really, for anyone involved in change, leaving through it.
Right.
And today, we're diving into some ideas that honestly offer a fresh angle. It's not your standard top-down change playbook.
Exactly. We're looking at this framework from Dr. Reg Butterfield, drawing on his paper a new framework for organizational change. And what's really cool is how it pulls together work from two uh, really significant thinkers, Gary Allen Fine and Damon Centola.
Yeah, these are names you should know if you're interested in how organizations really work.
Hmm.
Fine, who gets deep into small group cultures, and Centola, who's done amazing work on how behaviors actually spread through networks.
So this deep dive, it's kind of a shortcut, wouldn't you say? A way to grasp a more maybe nuanced and effective way to handle change.
I think so. It helps you understand why things work, or more often, why they don't. We want to give you some, maybe surprising insights, but also practical stuff you can actually use.
Whether you're leading the charge or just trying to understand what's going on around you.
Exactly. So our mission, if you like, is to unpack Gary Allen Fine's idea of Idio Culture and Damon Centola's network science,
Right.
and see how putting them together can help create change that actually sticks around. And this applies everywhere: traditional companies, flat structures, you name it.
Okay, let's dig in then.
Yeah.
We need to build that foundation first, so let's look at Fine and Centola individually, starting with Gary Allen Fine and this concept of idioculture. What's that about?
Right. So Gary Allen Fine is a sociologist. He spent ages studying the cultures that just kind of pop up in small groups. And idioculture, that's his term for the unique, very local ways a group understands things. Shared jokes, experiences, unwritten rules, little rituals.
Ah, like an inside language almost.
Exactly. Think about any team you've been on. The way you interact, the shorthand, the stuff only you guys get. That's basically an idioculture in action.
Right, right. Every team has its own little vibe, its own world.
Hmm.
And Fine says these microcultures are super important for behavior.
Hugely important. They shape how people act, how they see themselves in the group. So, if you want to change behavior within that group, Fine says certain things need to be there.
Okay, what are the key conditions?
Well, first off, shared identity and trust. People need to feel like they belong and they need to trust each other.
Makes sense.
If a team's got strong bonds, they're way more likely to try something new if a trusted member suggests this. Second is alignment with group norms, meaning the new thing can't completely clash with how the group already does things. If a team loves informal chats, forcing some super rigid reporting system on them, that'll get pushback unless the benefit is crystal clear.
Yeah, you can't just ignore the existing culture. It's like pushing water uphill. What else?
Reinforcement through repetition. This is key. New ways of doing things need practice. Regular meetings where you use the new process, talk about it, that repetition makes it stick.
Okay, practice makes permanent.
Sort of, yeah. Then you've got boundary spanners as catalysts. These are the people who connect the group to the outside world, maybe other teams or upper management,
Why are they important?
because they can bring in new ideas and, crucially, make them seem legitimate, like a team leader explaining why a new company goal actually matters for their team's work.
Ah, the translators.
Exactly. And finally, adaptability to external pressures. Sometimes outside forces just make change necessary. Think new regulations hitting a finance team they have to adapt, even if it disrupts their established routines.
So Fine's work really highlights the power of these local small group realities, the
Mhm.
shared meanings, the norms, how groups kind of protect their own way of doing things.
Right. And those boundaries are interesting. They protect the culture, but they can also block outside influence, like a big change initiative.
And that's relevant whether you're in a strict hierarchy or a more fluid, distributed setup.
Absolutely. In a hierarchy, leaders need to know about these local norms to figure out where change might hit a wall. In distributed models, it's more about empowering teams to adapt changes in ways that work for them, while still, keeping the bigger picture in mind.
Okay, that's a great foundation on the micro level. Now let's shift gears to Damon Centola and his work on networks.
Right. Centola, he's at the University of Pennsylvania, and his focus is really on how things, behaviors, ideas, innovations actually spread through social connections.
Social contagion, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Social contagion, the influence of network structure, how that drives behavioral change and collective action. He uses a lot of cool experimental methods, and his work has real implications for things like public health and policy, too.
And he talks about complex contagions. What makes them complex?
Good question. A complex contagion isn't like catching a cold, where one exposure might be enough. These are behaviors that usually need reinforcement from multiple people in your network before you adopt them.
Ah, so it's not just hearing about it once.
Nope. Think about starting a new, complicated software tool at work or adopting a whole new collaborative process. You probably need to see several colleagues using it, hear good things from different people you trust before you think, okay, maybe I should try this. It needs social validation.
Okay, that makes sense. So what does Centola say needs to happen for these kinds of complex behaviors to spread widely?
He's identified several key conditions. First, you need a critical mass, enough early adopters to get things moving.
Like a tipping point.
Kind of, yeah. You need enough people doing it that it becomes visible, noticeable, maybe even feels like the norm is shifting. Think about enough employees signing up for a wellness program eventually. Others feel more inclined to join.
Okay, critical mass. What else?
Clustered network structures. This is really interesting. Those complex behaviors, the ones needing reinforcement, they spread best in groups where people are tightly connected, where everyone knows everyone else.
Why is that?
Because in those dense clusters, you're constantly getting signals from multiple peers. Everyone's talking about it, using it, reinforcing the behavior. If everyone in your department adopts a new project tool, the pressure and support to adopt it yourself is much higher.
So the clusters act like little echo chambers, but in a good way for spreading the behavior.
Exactly. They incubate it. But then you need bridging ties.
Connections between the clusters.
Right. These are the links between different, otherwise separate groups. Without them, a great idea or a new behavior can get stuck in its original cluster. It won't spread organization-wide.
So things like cross-functional teams could be bridging ties.
Perfect example. They naturally connect different departments or areas. Then there's the obvious but crucial factor: social influence and reinforcement. People follow people, they respect peers, managers, leaders. Seeing them adopt and endorse the change is powerful.
And
Finally, iterative feedback loops. As things spread, people try them, they have experiences, they give feedback. The network needs to be able to adapt and refine the change based on that real-world input. Like a team trying a new workflow, finding glitches, and feeding that back to improve it for everyone.
so Centola's view is about understanding the network structure, the clusters, the need for a critical mass, and those absolutely vital bridging ties to connect everything.
Precisely. And again, this applies in different structures. Hierarchies might focus on identifying influencers in clusters and using middle managers as bridges. Distributed models might focus more on ensuring strong connections between autonomous teams so things don't just stay siloed.
This is fascinating. So you've got Fine explaining why change takes hold in the small group, the micro level,
Yeah, the local dynamics, the Idio culture.
and Centola explaining how it can then spread across the wider organization, the macro level network effect.
Exactly. It's a dual lens.
Putting them together seems like it could unlock a much smarter way to approach change.
That's the heart of Dr. Butterfield's framework. Fine helps you make the change relevant and meaningful locally. Centola gives you the roadmap for how to scale it effectively across the whole system. You get local resonance and broad impact.
Okay, foundations laid, Fine and Centola. Now let's get practical. How does this combined approach help organizations deal with the chaos of today's world? Because change feels constant now, right?
Oh, absolutely. Constant disruption is the name of the game. Technology shifts, market changes, societal expectations evolving. It's relentless.
And the old ways of managing change, those very linear step-by-step models, they often seem to fall short, don't they?
They really do. They weren't built for this kind of ongoing, unpredictable flux. They assume a stability that just doesn't exist anymore.
So how do Fine and Centola help us navigate this reality more effectively?
Well, think about Fine's Idio Culture again. Understanding those local nuances lets you tailor the change instead of a blunt, one-size-fits-all mandate from the top.
Which often gets ignored or resisted.
Exactly. You adapt the message, maybe even the implementation details, to fit each team's specific culture and workflow. This dramatically reduces resistance because it feels less imposed and more relevant.
And that works in both hierarchies and distributed setups.
Yeah. In a hierarchy, maybe it's the middle manager's job to translate the big picture goal into something meaningful for their team's idioculture. In a distributed model, the team itself might have more autonomy to adapt the initiative to fit their context.
Okay, so Fine helps with local adaptation, And Centola's network science helps with.
With the scaling part, once you've got some local adaptation happening, understanding the network helps you spread it strategically. You identify those key clusters where it's likely to catch on first.
The early adopters, the enthusiastic groups.
Right. And crucially, you identify and leverage those bridging ties, the people or teams connecting different parts of the organization to carry the change beyond those initial pockets.
So in a hierarchy, that might be setting up a formal cross-functional task force.
Could be. Or identifying key individuals who naturally network across departments. In a distributed setup, it might be more about nurturing those informal peer networks, making sure teams are talking to each other and sharing what works.
So it's this combination again. Local relevance, thanks to Fine, and widespread adoption facilitated by Centola's network insights.
That's the key. You need both. Local relevance makes it stick initially. Network awareness helps it spread. That dual approach is what gives you the agility and resilience to handle today's complex environment.
Okay, so if an organization wants to actually do this, what are the concrete steps? How do you put this into practice?
Right, actionable steps. First, you got to map your social networks. Seriously, you need to understand who talks to whom, where the natural clusters are, and who those connectors, the potential bridging ties, are.
How do you do that? Surveys, observation.
Could be a mix. Organizational network analysis tools exist, but even informal observation and talking to people can reveal a lot. The point is to get a picture of the real connections, not just the org chart. This is vital in any structure.
Okay, map the network, then what?
Engage the boundary spanners. Once you know who connects different groups, get them involved. These are your key influencers for spreading ideas. In hierarchies, again, middle managers are often natural spanners. In distributed models, look for those well-connected peers or informal leaders.
Get your connectors on board. Makes sense. What else?
Create spaces for dialogue, real dialogue, not just presentations. People need to talk about the change, understand it in their own context, voice concerns, maybe even help shape it.
So town halls, workshops.
Sure, in a hierarchy. Or in distributed models, maybe it's dedicated online channels, communities of practice, regular cross-team check-ins. The format matters less than the intent, genuine conversation.
Okay. Dialogue. And the last piece.
Monitor and adapt constantly. Change isn't fire and forget. You need feedback loops. How is it landing? What problems are emerging? Where is it working well? You need to be ready to adjust course based on what you learn. Formal reviews, agile check-ins, whatever fits your culture.
So mapping, engaging connectors, fostering dialogue, and adapting.
Yeah.
By doing these, you get that local buy-in, the network effect for spreading, and the flexibility to handle bumps in the road.
Exactly. It builds adaptability right into the change process itself. And remember, how you do these things depends on your organizational structure.
Mike, you mentioned that before. Why is structure so critical here?
Because structure shapes communication flow, decision-making, and where silos might naturally form. Traditional hierarchies. Often clear authority, but risk of departmental silos. Bridging ties become extra important there.
And distributed models.
More flexible, more autonomy, but risk of chaos or fragmentation if there aren't clear guiding principles or accountability. That's where things like guardrails come in.
Guardrails. Explain that a bit more.
Think of guardrails as the necessary boundaries or shared principles in a highly autonomous system. In a distributed model, you might give teams lots of freedom on how they implement a change, but the guardrails define the non-negotiables, the core strategic goals, the ethical standards, the essential interfaces with other teams. They provide alignment without rigid control.
Okay, so guardrails provide the necessary structure within freedom, and bridging ties break down silos.
You got it. Understanding your specific structure, hierarchy, distributed, hybrid, lets you tailor how you apply Fine and Centola's ideas. Do you focus on empowering middle managers as translators and bridge builders? Or do you focus on defining clear guardrails and fostering peer-to-peer connections between autonomous teams? The principles are the same, but the tactics differ.
Okay, this is getting really practical now. We understand the why from Fine and Centola and the what in terms of applying it to modern challenges. Let's nail down the how. How do we actually transform our change processes using these ideas?
Right, moving from theory to action, and like Dr. Butterfield suggests, this isn't a rigid formula, it's more an approach, a way of thinking. 4 main steps seem to emerge.
Okay, step 1. Looks like it's all about understanding local dynamics, drawing from Fine.
Exactly. Step 1. Understand local dynamics. Fine. This means first actively identifying the Idio cultures. Who are the distinct groups? What are their norms, their ways of communicating?
How do you find that out? Ask them.
Yeah, pretty much. In a hierarchy, middle managers might gather these insights. In a distributed model, teams might self-reflect and articulate their own culture. Then, engage those boundary spanners we talked about, the people who connect these local cultures,
Formal leaders, informal influencers.
whoever they are in your context. And finally, tailor your messages. Don't use corporate jargon if a team speaks plainly. Frame the change in terms of their values and priorities, like a new health initiative maybe for sales. You frame it around energy and performance, but for engineering, maybe it's about focus and stress reduction. Same initiative, different angles.
Speak their language. Got it. Step 2. This seems to be Centola's territory.
Step 2, leverage network structures. Centola. First, focus on clusters. Identify those dense pockets where people interact a lot. Departments, project teams, whatever they are, these are your initial adoption zones.
Start where the connections are strong.
Right. Then, actively strengthen bridging ties. Create connections between those clusters. Formal committees, cross-functional projects, informal meetups, whatever builds links.
Prevent the clusters from becoming silos.
Exactly. And the goal here is to achieve critical mass within those initial clusters, which then helps the change jump across the bridges to other parts of the network. Think about rolling out new software. Get 1 or 2 key departments fully on board first. Their success and advocacy will help pull others along.
Okay, clusters, bridges, critical mass. Step 3 sounds intriguing. Foster imperfect communication.
Huh. Yeah, it sounds wrong, doesn't it? Step 3, foster imperfect communication. This is about ditching the overly polished, top-down announcements.
The perfectly crafted memo that nobody reads.
Or the slick presentation that leaves no room for questions. Instead, replace polished messaging with real dialogue. Workshops, Q&As, forums where people can actually grapple with the change.
We get messier, more human.
Pretty much. Also, allow time for reflection. People need space to process. Don't expect instant buy-in. Maybe phase the rollout, do pilots, and crucially, encourage co-creation. Let people have a hand in shaping how the change happens in their area. Brainstorming, feedback sessions, letting teams experiment.
Gives them ownership.
Absolutely. It moves from doing change to people to doing change with people.
Okay, makes sense when you put it that way. And the final step.
Step 4, embed change in everyday practices. This is about making it stick. You need to reinforce the new behaviors through repeated interactions. Consistent use, consistent messaging, seeing leaders and peers doing it.
Back to Fine's repetition idea.
Exactly. And Centola's reinforcement. Make it part of the routine. Formalize it if needed, new policies in a hierarchy, or let teams integrate it into their own workflows in a distributed model. And, tying back to an earlier point, monitor and adapt. Keep checking in, keep gathering feedback, keep tweaking. It's never really done.
Right, continuous improvement.
Always. So those are the 4 steps. Understand local dynamics, leverage networks, foster imperfect communication, and embed in practice.
And just to quickly circle back on those key terms for clarity, bridging ties and guardrails. Bridging ties are the connectors.
Yes. The links, people, teams, forums that connect different clusters or groups, preventing silos and allowing ideas to flow across the organization. Vital for scaling change.
And guardrails are the essential boundaries in more autonomous setups.
Right. Particularly in distributed models. They provide the necessary alignment, core goals, values, standards that allows teams the freedom to adapt change locally without the whole thing falling apart. Balancing autonomy with coherence.
Got it. Super helpful clarification.
It's all about using the right tools for your specific organizational landscape.
So putting this all together using Fine and Centola, it really feels like a fundamental shift away from how many organizations still try to manage change.
It really is a paradigm shift, away from linear mechanical thinking towards something that acknowledges complexity, human dynamics, network power.
Can we quickly contrast the old and new? Like, what are the key differences?
Sure. Traditional change, often top-down, leadership decides, dictates. This new approach, much more bottom-up and participatory. It values local input, Idio Culture.
Communication style.
Traditional, polished, controlled, often one way. New approach, authentic, transparent, dialogue-focused, even imperfect, building trust over perfection.
Pace and flexibility.
Traditional, often static, rigid timelines seen as an event, new approach. Dynamic, adaptive, ongoing process expects feedback and iteration.
And the focus. Individual versus collective.
Traditional often focuses on individual compliance or adoption. New approach understands change is collective, relies on network spread, peer influence, and reinforcement within clusters.
So moving from mandate to inclusion, from polish to dialogue, from static plans to dynamic adaptation, from individual focus to collective networks.
You've nailed it. And underpinning this are those core principles:
Hmm.
behavior-centric communication, words shape actions, reinforcement across levels, local and network, and holistic engagement, addressing both microcultures and macro structures.
It feels much more alive,
Mm.
more responsive to how things actually happen.
It is, and honestly, much better suited for the kind of constant change and uncertainty we're all dealing with now. It builds in the agility that older models just don't have.
So wrapping up, the message isn't don't change, it's understand how change really happens by looking at these social dynamics.
Exactly. Use Fine's insights about local culture, use Centola's insights about networks, foster real communication, and you move from pushing change uphill to hopefully facilitating a more natural, sustainable flow. It starts local, spreads through connections, and thrives on authenticity.
Fantastic summary. So the big takeaways. Understanding those small group idiocultures is crucial. Harnessing the power of social networks for spread is key. And authentic, adaptive communication ties it all together.
Couldn't have said it better. It's about seeing change as the social process it truly is.
So for everyone listening, think about your own experiences. When has a change effort really worked or really failed? How much did the local team vibe, that Idio culture, play a part? How did you really find out about the change official channels or the grapevine?
Yeah, reflect on that. And maybe a final thought to chew on. Where in your organization, maybe in your immediate team or a group you know well, could you start thinking about its idio culture? How could you foster a space that's more receptive to change by understanding those local norms better?
Or, flipping it, can you spot any existing bridging ties in your network? People who connect different groups. How could you maybe leverage those connections, informally even, to help a good idea or a necessary change get more traction?
Lots to think about there. And if you want to go deeper, definitely check out the original work. Gary Allen Fine's stuff on Little League teams or his book Tiny Publics are great places to start for idioculture.
And for the network side,
Damon Centola's book, How Behavior Spreads, is essential reading, and his experiments described in the journal Science are really fascinating too.
brilliant recommendations. There's clearly a lot more depth there.
For sure, we've only skimmed the surface today.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We really hope this is giving you a new, practical way to think about and navigate organizational change.
Hope it helps.